said that after the Columbia deal. They kind of said that after voting in Germany elections. But I want to show you this Columbia agreement, this peace agreement with rebels. Once the president scored that deal with FARC elements, the revolutionary elements in the country, pre-election polls showed that it was going to pass easily. It didn't. In fact, it wasn't even close to that poll result. Now, does that mean, and does this trend, like Brexit, like some of these other polls we see of populist rage or populist surprises globally, have any bearing here? Let's ask PatCaddell, former Democratic pollster. What do you think, Patrick?
Well, I think they do. I mean, I've never seen the polls so screwy. Look, we have right now a poll, we have two polls up. We have polls showing somebody claiming I don't know what they do. They claim that Hillary's 12 points ahead. Washington Post says it's 4. That's on the same day, basically, of polling.
And the same group, right? Likely voters, right?
So, well, a lot depends on the sample of likely voters. I'll tell you the other problem, though, is they're getting way too many Democrats in a lot of these polls. Give you an example on the Fox poll. A week ago, Fox had an average of a Democratic edge over Republicans of 2 points. That would have been roughly in that range for last 4 polls. Suddenly it goes from 2 to 9. And then she's ahead by 7. Well, I can tell you, 25% of the self-described conservatives said they were voting for Democrats for Congress. That's insane. When these polls are everywhere, and part of the problem is who will talk and who will not talk. The response rates are terrible. It is a very difficult thing. But you know,
were they off, Pat, significantly during the Republican primary season?
No, they were off a lot. Well, we remember Michigan was famous, but we've had another series of trends. Let's mention these too. 2014 is when it starts. All the polls saying it'll be close in the Senate. The Democrats will hold, so they get wiped out. It's a landslide. A year later in Kentucky, a Trump-like gubernatorial candidate the polls said he was losing by 5, and he wins by 9. That's a 14-point margin change from the last polls last minute. In Israel that year, Netanyahu was supposed to lose. He wins. You mentioned Brexit. You mentioned Columbia. There is something we're having difficulty. I go for attitudinals, and this is more deeper questions to try to understand what's happening. And this is where the most important thing, the election's not over. There's a quarter of the voters who are unfavorable to both candidates, and they keep bouncing around. We've never had this kind of volatility, and the stories you talked about today will have an effect. Eventually the corruption stories. Look, I was the youngest person on Richard Nixon's enemies list. This is smelling a lot like Watergate to me, of the FBI and corruption, and we have bombings. I was in the Civil Rights Movement. Now we have bombing, headquarters. And the other thing is there's a story breaking right now this afternoon from James O'Keefe, who, with Hannah Giles, did the Acorn stuff of Democratic operatives talking about inciting violence at Trump rallies. I mean, this could be serious stuff.
That is if the mainstream media bother to cover it, though. It's like a tree falling in the forest if no one's there.
That is the problem here. The country knows the mainstream media is on a jihad, which I have never seen. In fact, let me say this. I got some problems with some of the finagling going on with some of the polls, and when they're done and how they're done, which we don't have time to get into it, but some of it looks pretty shady. And the problem here is, this is a democracy. You've got to trust that people will figure it out. And we've got a big question. Is this an election about candidates? In which case, I think Trump loses. Or is this election about direction and we keep going the way we've been going? And does the political establishment continue to rule? In that case, I think Trump can win if he stresses that. But you put your finger on it. The collusion going on, whether it's in not so much in polling, but it's there, but also about messaging. And what's happening in the news. The idea of suppressing news is truly frightening. And Donald Trump, I think, on Wednesday that debate will be important because he may say some things, has the opportunity that people haven't even heard because the media won't cover it.
All right. Thank you, Patrick, very, very much. It is interesting when you see time and again polls that were markedly off. Now, again, Donald Trump could be looking at, well, look, I'm so far behind in some polls that maybe I won't be able to make up the difference here. Then again, when you see these double-point swings and double-digit swings in other seminal polls across the country that were proven wrong, on election day itself, on referendum day itself, it does give you pause. So we're here to say simply, when the consensus is all saying one thing, it would not kill you to step back and say, well, it's the consensus. All right. In the meantime,